I found out my parents left everything to my sister in their will. I stopped paying their bills and extra expenses. A month later, my mother texted me, "The mortgage is due." No greeting, no apology. I did not argue. I just replied, "I know, ask your heir to pay it." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your sanity. My name is Camille and I am 35 years old. Sitting in my corner office in Buckhead, Atlanta, overlooking the sprawling skyline, I finally felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. I am a luxury real estate broker and property manager. I built my business from the absolute ground up, working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing weekends, and pouring every ounce of my energy into becoming successful. But to my family, my success was never something to celebrate or respect. It was simply an endless resource to be tapped. For the past 8 years, I had been the silent financial pillar of my family. I paid the exorbitant mortgage on my parents' 4-bedroom house. I covered their luxury car insurance. I funded their lavish anniversary trips to the Bahamas. I did it because that is what you are supposed to do. In our community, there is an unspoken rule that when you make it, you pull your family up with you. You take care of your people so they can hold their heads high at Sunday service. But gratitude was never part of the transaction. My money was expected, but my voice was ignored. 30 days ago, the reality of my position in this family was made perfectly clear. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and I had arrived early at their house to help set up the catered dinner. I walked into my father's home office, looking for a pen to write inside their anniversary card. There, on his mahogany desk, sitting right out in the open, was a thick folder from their estate lawyer. The bold letters across the top caught my eye immediately. Last Will and Testament of Reginald and Diane. I should have looked away to respect their privacy, but an instinct deep in my gut told me to open it. I flipped past the legal jargon until I found the section detailing the distribution of assets. The words on the page felt like a physical blow to my chest. Upon our passing, the primary residence and all attached financial accounts shall be left entirely to our youngest daughter Chloe and her husband Spencer. I stood there frozen in the quiet office, listening to the faint sound of my mother laughing in the kitchen. The house I was currently paying the mortgage on, the house I had single-handedly saved from foreclosure 5 years ago, was going straight to my sister. Chloe is 32 years old and has never held a job for more than 6 months. She spends her days playing the role of a wealthy socialite, taking selfies in designer clothes that I bought for my mother. She is the golden child who can do no wrong, the beautiful, fragile daughter who constantly needs to be rescued. And then there is Spencer, her husband. Spencer is a white man who calls himself a visionary entrepreneur, but spends all his time burning through my parents' savings on failed startup ideas. He constantly talks down to me, explains real estate to me as if I do not own my own brokerage, and treats my parents' home like his own personal resort. My parents were taking the wealth I generated and handing it over to a man who refused to work and a daughter who refused to grow up. But the knife twisted even deeper when I read the next paragraph. It was a personal note my parents had added to the legal document explaining their decision. "We are leaving nothing to our eldest daughter Camille, as she is too independent and strong. She can take care of herself and does not need our family legacy. Chloe and Spencer need the financial stability to raise their future family." I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not storm into the dining room and flip the table. Instead, I felt something much more dangerous than sadness. I felt absolute crystal clear clarity. For years, I had played the role of the dutiful black daughter carrying the heavy weight of their financial incompetence, while they praised Chloe for simply existing. They viewed my hard work as a shield for their irresponsibility. My independence was being used as a weapon against me to justify their blatant favoritism. I carefully closed the folder, aligned it perfectly on the desk, exactly where I found it, and walked out of the room. I pasted on a flawless smile, and paid for their entire extravagant anniversary dinner that night. I even raised my glass and toasted to their health and longevity, because I knew in my heart it was the last meal they would ever eat on my dime. That very night, I went back to my luxury condo, poured myself a glass of expensive wine, opened my laptop, and logged into my banking portal. My finger hovered over the trackpad for just a second before I started dismantling the financial life support system I had provided for nearly a decade. First, I went to the recurring transfers page and canceled the automatic payment for their $4,500 monthly mortgage. Click. Then I moved to my credit card accounts and removed my mother as an authorized user on my Platinum card, stopping her daily trips to the salon and boutiques. Click. I canceled the auto pay for my father's premium truck insurance. Click. I even logged into the city utility portal and removed my payment method from their electricity, water, and gas bills. Click, click, click. With every single cancellation, a heavy chain fell off my shoulders. I was no longer their personal bank. I was no longer their safety net. I was finally just Camille, the independent daughter who could take care of herself just like they wanted. I watched the scheduled payments disappear from the screen, and I felt lighter than I had in years. For 30 days, it was completely quiet. It was the calm before the inevitable storm. I knew they would not notice immediately. My mother never checked bank statements, and my father simply assumed the money printer would never run out of ink. They continued their country club lunches, Sunday church donations, and luxury shopping trips, completely unaware that the well had permanently run dry. I used those 30 days to prepare. I met with my own lawyers, secured my business assets, and made sure there were no legal loopholes they could use against me. I fortified my walls because I knew the explosion would be massive. Then this morning, exactly 1 month after I pulled the plug, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was a text message from my mother. It did not say, "Good morning, Camille." It did not ask how I was doing or how my business was going. It simply read, "The mortgage is due." The sheer audacity was almost impressive. She was so incredibly used to me handling every single financial burden that she treated me like an automated customer service line. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked out at the beautiful Atlanta skyline, and typed my reply. "I know. Ask your heir to pay it." I hit send, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and went back to reviewing a multi-million-dollar commercial contract. The game had officially changed, and I was no longer playing by their rules. The text message from my mother was only the beginning. I knew the real explosion would not happen over a text message. It would happen exactly 48 hours later, on a Thursday afternoon. Thursday is a sacred day for my mother. Every single week at exactly 2 in the afternoon, Diane walks into Crown and Glory, which is the most exclusive Black-owned hair salon in Atlanta. It is not just a place to get a silk press or a fresh sew-in. It is the absolute epicenter of gossip for the high society and church ladies of our community. If you want the entire congregation to know how successful your children are or how much money your husband makes, you make sure to say it loudly while sitting in the plush velvet chairs of that salon. For the past 4 years, my Platinum credit card had been kept firmly on file at the front desk. I paid for my mother's weekly appointments, my sister's frequent color corrections, and whatever ridiculously expensive hair care products they decided to take home. It was an unspoken arrangement. I provided the funds, and they harvested the social clout. I was standing on the expansive balcony of a new luxury apartment complex I was touring for a high-profile client when my phone started vibrating furiously in my blazer pocket. The screen flashed my mother's name. I let it ring. It stopped and then immediately started ringing again. Then came the predictable flood of text messages. "Answer your phone right now. What is wrong with your bank card? Call me back immediately." I calmly handed the architectural blueprints back to my assistant, instructed her to give me a few minutes, and stepped further out onto the balcony, overlooking the bustling city streets, before I swiped to answer the call. Before I could even offer a polite greeting, My mother's voice came screaming through the speaker so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Camille, what on earth is going on with your bank? I am standing at the front desk, and Monique just told me your card was declined 3 times. 3 times, Camille? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Sister Williams and First Lady Thomas are sitting right there in the waiting area, staring at me like I am some kind of charity case. I leaned against the cool glass railing and let the warm Atlanta wind wash over my face. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother, with her freshly styled hair smelling of expensive oils, wearing a designer silk blouse I had purchased for her birthday, standing at the marble reception desk, trying to laugh off a declined credit card in front of the most notorious gossips in our entire church congregation. I knew exactly what she had done too. She had probably added a deep conditioning treatment, a scalp massage, and bought 3 bottles of premium edge control without a second thought because it was always Camille paying for it. It was an absolute masterpiece of humiliation, and she had walked right into it all by herself. "There is nothing wrong with my bank," I replied, keeping my voice completely steady and void of any emotion. "The card was not declined because of a bank error, Mother. It was declined because I canceled it." The line went completely dead for 5 full seconds. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to process the sheer audacity of what I had just said. In her world, I was not allowed to say no. I was the financial mule expected to carry the load without complaint. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped to a furious, venomous whisper. She was clearly trying not to make a scene, but her rage was palpable through the phone. "You did what? Have you completely lost your mind? Turn that card back on immediately, Camille. I owe Monique $350 and I am not walking out of the salon looking like a fool in front of First Lady Thomas." I took a slow, deep breath. For years, this exact tone of voice would have sent me into a blind panic. My heart would have raced and I would have scrambled to transfer funds, apologized profusely, and done everything in my power to make sure she was comfortable and her reputation was intact. The guilt of being a bad daughter would have eaten me alive. But the woman standing on the balcony today was not the same daughter from a month ago. That anxious, people-pleasing daughter died the moment she read that will on her father's mahogany desk. "I cannot do that," I said simply, my voice eerily calm. "I am restructuring my finances. I am cutting out all unnecessary expenses to protect my personal assets. You know, building wealth for the future. Exactly like you and Dad are doing for Chloe and Spencer." She gasped. It was a sharp, sudden intake of breath that told me she caught the underlying meaning of my words. But she was far too focused on her immediate social crisis to put the pieces together. She did not realize I knew about the will yet. She just thought I was being rebellious. "Stop speaking nonsense and fix this card right now," she hissed, her panic rising. "You are embarrassing me in front of the entire community. I am your mother, and you are not allowed to humiliate me like this. You have a responsibility to this family. You are the oldest. You are supposed to take care of us." "My responsibility is to myself," I replied, my voice turning to absolute ice. "You have a designer purse full of credit cards. Use one of yours. Or better yet, call Chloe. Since she is the precious golden child and the future of this family, I am sure her visionary husband can spare $350 to pay for your hair today." "Camille." "Diane. Listen to me," my mother screamed, throwing away any pretense of keeping quiet. The entire salon must have gone completely silent because I could hear the faint sound of a blow-dryer clicking off in the background. "You are acting like a spoiled, ungrateful brat. I gave you life. I am calling your father right now. I am going to tell Reginald exactly what you are doing, and he will teach you a lesson about respecting your elders. You are going to regret this day, Camille." I smiled, looking out at the endless stream of traffic below, feeling a profound sense of liberation. "Tell Dad I said hello," I whispered, and then I pulled the phone away from my face and pressed the red end call button. I did not just hang up. I went directly into my phone settings and temporarily blocked her number. Then I went to my father's contact and blocked his number too. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. They were going to panic. They would probably have to call my useless white brother-in-law Spencer to come to the salon and pay a bill that I knew, for an absolute fact, he could not afford. Or worse, my mother would have to beg First Lady Thomas for a loan. The dominoes were falling exactly how I had set them up. I slid my phone back into my pocket, smoothed out the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked back inside the building to finish selling a $2 million penthouse. The peace was intoxicating. The silence on my phone was golden. But I knew this was just a minor skirmish. The real war was officially scheduled for the family barbecue this coming Sunday. Sunday afternoon arrived with the suffocating humidity that only Atlanta can produce. The annual family cookout was in full swing in the expansive backyard of the house I technically owned but allowed my parents to live in. To any outsider looking over the pristine white fence, it looked like the epitome of Black excellence. Smooth R&B music was playing from the outdoor speakers. The smell of smoked brisket and grilled hot links filled the air. My mother was floating around in a flowing summer dress holding a glass of sweet tea, acting like the perfect southern matriarch. But beneath the shiny veneer, the rot was festering. I sat quietly in a patio chair wearing a simple sundress, holding a bottle of water. I was watching the performance unfold. Since the credit card incident on Thursday, my mother had been giving me the silent treatment. She did not greet me when I arrived. She just pursed her lips and turned her back, which was fine by me. But the real entertainment was happening over by the grill. Spencer, my sister Chloe's husband, was holding court. Spencer is a 34-year-old white man who wears expensive loafers without socks and uses buzzwords like synergy and disruptive innovation to mask the fact that he has not held a steady job in 5 years. He was leaning against the brick barbecue pit holding a premium imported beer that I had undoubtedly paid for during my last grocery run for the house. A group of my aunt's uncles and my father were gathered around him listening to him speak as if he were giving a TED Talk. "You see the problem with traditional real estate," Spencer was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire yard. "It is a dying model. It does not create any real intrinsic value. You are just moving existing assets around and taking a massive cut for doing essentially nothing. It is parasitic if we are being honest." I took a slow sip of my water. He was talking about me. He knew I could hear him. Now my new tech startup Spencer continued gesturing grandly with his beer bottle. "We are building a decentralized platform that will revolutionize how communities interact with local commerce. We are creating actual value. We are building the future. It takes vision. It takes a high-level entrepreneurial mindset that most people simply cannot comprehend." My father, Reginald, nodded enthusiastically, flipping a burger on the grill. "That is right, son," he said, beaming with pride. "You have to be a builder. You have to leave a legacy. That is exactly what I have been saying." My mother walked over and placed a loving hand on Spencer's shoulder. "We are just so incredibly proud of you, Spencer," she cooed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It takes a brilliant mind to start a tech company. Not everyone has that kind of intellect. Some people just chase quick commissions, but you are building an empire for our Chloe." Chloe, who was sitting nearby scrolling through her phone while eating a plate of potato salad, looked up and smiled smugly. "He works so hard, Mom," she chimed in. "He was up until noon yesterday just taking meetings." I watched this sickening display of delusion and favoritism without changing my expression. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Spencer was standing in my backyard drinking my beer, lecturing my family about intrinsic value, while his visionary startup had generated exactly $0 in revenue. Meanwhile, my parasitic real estate brokerage had paid for the very grill my father was standing in front of. I had closed 2 commercial deals this week alone that generated more income than Spencer had seen in his entire adult life. But in my parents' eyes, he was the conquering hero, and I was just the arrogant daughter who had the audacity to cut off their credit cards. The sheer disrespect was breathtaking. They were actively praising a man who was living off their savings, while insulting the woman who was actually funding their lifestyle. I could see the smug satisfaction on my father's face as he glanced over at me, expecting me to look hurt or defensive. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to seek his approval so he could deny it to me. Instead, I just smiled, raised my water bottle in a mock toast, and took another sip. I was not going to give them the reaction they desperately wanted. My silence seemed to infuriate my father more than any argument could have. He aggressively slammed the metal spatula down onto the grill shelf. The loud clang made a few ants jump. Camille, my father, barked, his voice devoid of the warmth he had just been showering on Spencer. "Come inside the house right now. I need a word with you in the kitchen." He turned and marched toward the back door, not checking to see if I was following. Spencer smirked and took a triumphant sip of his beer, clearly believing he had won some sort of dominance battle. My mother shot me a warning glare. I stood up slowly, smoothed out the front of my dress, and walked toward the house. The trap was set, and I knew exactly what was waiting for me in that kitchen. He was going to try and force my hand. He was going to use his authority as the patriarch to demand I turn the money back on. I walked through the sliding glass door into the cool air-conditioned kitchen, feeling my heartbeat steady and calm. The time for being the obedient bank account was officially over. I stepped through the sliding glass door into the kitchen, where the blast of the central air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the backyard. My father Reginald was standing by the large marble island, pretending to arrange a platter of sliced watermelon. As soon as the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, his entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The proud, beaming patriarch who was just singing Spencer's praises vanished into thin air. In his place was the furious, demanding, and incredibly entitled man I had known my entire life. "What kind of sick game are you playing, Camille?" he demanded, keeping his voice low and aggressive so the relatives outside would not hear the commotion. "Your mother told me you canceled the credit cards like some kind of petulant teenager, and this morning I got a notification from the bank that your automatic mortgage payment was reversed. Are you trying to embarrass this family on purpose?" I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the stainless steel refrigerator, keeping my breathing slow and my expression completely blank. "I am not playing any games," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I am simply no longer paying for things that do not belong to me. My financial restructuring is permanent." He slammed his heavy hand down on the marble counter, making the silver serving utensils rattle against the plates. "This house belongs to our family," he hissed, stepping closer to me. "You are the oldest child and you have a moral obligation to contribute to this household. I already spent a significant amount of money this month on important networking. I bought a Rolex watch for Pastor Thomas for his 20th pastoral anniversary. It is a high-quality replica, a super clone, but it looks exactly like the real thing. You know, I have to maintain our family's reputation in front of the church board. Spencer is trying to pitch his new tech startup to the church investment committee, and we need the pastor's blessing. You need to pull out your phone and transfer $4,500 to my checking account this afternoon. The mortgage cannot be late, and I will not look like a fool in front of my congregation." I looked him dead in the eye and let the absolute absurdity of his words hang in the quiet air of the kitchen. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust wash over me. He had taken my hard-earned money, the money I made working 80-hour weeks, dealing with demanding real estate clients, and he was using it to buy a fake luxury watch for a pastor. And he was doing it to help his lazy white son-in-law scam the church out of investment money for a fake business. The layers of grifting and delusion were truly staggering. "No," I said. It was a single sharp word delivered without a hint of hesitation. My father froze. For 35 years, he was used to my quiet compliance. In the past, whenever he cornered me in this very kitchen with a financial emergency, I would instantly reach for my phone, open my banking app, and transfer whatever amount he demanded, just to keep the peace. He stared at my hands, waiting for me to reach into my purse. When I did not move, his face went from a deep crimson to pale with shock. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising rage. I said no, I repeated, maintaining direct eye contact. I am not paying the mortgage this month. I am not paying it next month. I will never pay another dime for this house or any of your ridiculous social climbing expenses ever again. You can go ask Pastor Thomas to give the fake watch back so you can return it. Or you can go right back outside to the patio and ask your precious visionary son-in-law Spencer to use his brilliant entrepreneurial mindset to print some cash for the bank. Since he creates so much intrinsic value, I am sure he can cover the $4,500. You ungrateful little girl, he roared, abandoning his attempt to keep his voice down. He took a threatening step toward me and pointed a thick finger right in my face. Your mother and I gave you life. We raised you. We put a roof over your head so you could have the career you have today. Now you make a little bit of money and you think you can turn your back on us. You are just jealous of your sister. You have always been jealous of Chloe because she has a happy family and a loving husband, while you are just a bitter single woman who is obsessed with money and status. You have no husband and no children, so you owe this family your support. I let out a cold laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the kitchen. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of pure disbelief. Jealous, I asked, tilting my head. You actually think I am jealous that she married a useless leech who refuses to get a real job? Or am I jealous that you and Mom are actively trying to steal my wealth to hand it over to them? He blinked rapidly, his outstretched finger trembling slightly before he slowly lowered his hand. What on earth are you talking about? He stammered, his eyes darting back and forth. I saw the will, I said, letting the ice completely take over my tone. On your mahogany desk, exactly 1 month ago before your anniversary dinner. You and Mom drew up a brand new will, leaving all your assets, including the life insurance and this very house, to Chloe and Spencer. You actually wrote in the legal document that I was too independent and strong and did not need anything from the family legacy. Well, I completely agree with you. That is absolutely perfect. If Chloe and Spencer are the rightful heirs to this fake kingdom, then let them pay the royal taxes. I am not going to continue funding the estate you plan to give to my overgrown toddler of a sister. The silence in the kitchen became deafening. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded incredibly loud. I could see the sheer panic flash in my father's eyes as he realized his absolute dirtiest secret was out in the open. I knew exactly what he was doing behind my back. Any normal father would feel a profound sense of shame for that kind of cruel and calculated favoritism. A real man would have apologized or at least tried to explain himself. But not Reginald. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse, he chose to double down, clinging desperately to his last shred of patriarchal authority. That is my property, he screamed, his eyes bulging with uncontrollable rage. I can give it to whoever I want. You do not get to dictate what I do with my assets. You think your dirty real estate money can control me in my own home. Listen to me very carefully, Camille. This house is mine. And because of this disrespectful, ungrateful, arrogant attitude, I swear to God, you will not get a single brick from this house when I die. I would rather burn this entire place to the ground than leave it to you. I stood up straight, smoothed out the front of my sundress, and felt an overwhelming rush of adrenaline and pure joy. Everything was going exactly according to my plan. His anger was the ultimate weapon of a powerless man who did not realize he was already backed into a corner. I smiled at him, a slow, mysterious smile filled with absolute pity. I do not need to wait for you to die, I whispered. I turned my back on him and walked toward the sliding glass door, leaving him standing completely paralyzed in the middle of the kitchen. The barbecue was still going on outside, the R&B music was still playing, and the fake laughter of my relatives was still ringing through the humid summer air. But none of them knew that the countdown to the absolute destruction of this toxic family had officially begun. By Tuesday morning, the fallout from the Sunday cookout had shifted from stunned silence into desperate action. I was sitting at my glass desk in my Buckhead office, reviewing the final contracts for a commercial plaza acquisition. The morning sun was pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished marble floors of my brokerage. It was a space I had designed specifically to project power and competence. My assistant knocked softly on the heavy oak door before pushing it open with a hesitant look on her face. She told me Spencer was waiting in the lobby. He did not have an appointment and he was refusing to leave until he spoke to me. A small, amused smile played on my lips. I knew my father would run straight to him. After the absolute humiliation in the kitchen, Reginald had undoubtedly panicked. He probably told Spencer that the endless well of money had dried up and begged his visionary son-in-law to fix the problem. I told my assistant to send him in. I wanted to see exactly what kind of play this desperate grifter had drawn up. Spencer walked into my office a few moments later, and the contrast between his arrogant posture and the sheer desperation in his eyes was almost comical. He was wearing his usual startup uniform, consisting of a navy blazer over a plain gray t-shirt and designer jeans. But he looked disheveled. The smug confidence he paraded around my backyard 2 days ago was slipping. He closed the door behind him and took a seat in one of the leather guest chairs opposite my desk without being invited. He leaned back, spread his legs, and draped one arm over the back of the chair in a pathetic attempt to assert dominance in a room I owned. "Camille, we need to talk." He started, his tone patronizing and heavy with false authority. "Reginald told me about the little misunderstanding you two had in the kitchen on Sunday. He said you got emotional and took things out of context regarding the estate planning." I did not stop typing on my keyboard. I kept my eyes on my monitor for a full 10 seconds, letting the silence stretch out and make him uncomfortable before I finally looked up. "I did not get emotional, Spencer," I said calmly. "I read a legal document. There is no context that changes the definition of sole beneficiaries." He waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing away a minor detail. "You do not understand how these things work," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees, going full into his mansplaining routine. "Estate planning is complicated. Your parents are just trying to maximize tax efficiency. They know you are successful. They know you do not need the house. But right now we have a more pressing issue. The family is in a temporary cash flow crunch, and Reginald is stressed." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and folded my hands in my lap. "And how does this involve me?" I asked. Spencer let out a heavy sigh like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Listen, Camille, my startup is on the verge of a massive Series A funding round. We are talking millions. But we need a bridge loan to get us through the next development phase. I am offering you an exclusive opportunity. I need $50,000 today. It will cover my operational costs for the next quarter, and I will personally use a portion of it to pay Reginald and Diane's mortgage arrears so the bank gets off their back. In exchange, I will give you a 2% equity stake in my company. It is a win for everyone." I stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this mediocre white man sitting in the empire I built, demanding $50,000 to fund his delusions and pay the debts of the parents who just disinherited me, was staggering. "You want me to give you $50,000? I clarified, keeping my voice dangerously soft. "It is an investment, Camille," he corrected, pointing a finger at me. "And let us be completely honest here. What else are you going to do with that money? You are a single woman. You have no husband. You have no children to leave a legacy to. You just hoard wealth in this glass tower while your family struggles. Chloe and I are building an actual family. We are the future of this bloodline. It is your duty as the older sister to support us until my company takes off. You do not need all this capital sitting around doing nothing." The air in the office grew ice cold. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. He had verbalized the exact toxic mindset my parents had harbored for years. To them, my lack of a husband and children meant my life had no inherent value beyond what I could provide for them. My success was public property, while Chloe's mere existence was a sacred treasure that required funding. I reached forward and pressed the silver button on my intercom system. "David," I said clearly into the microphone, speaking to my head of building security, "please come up to my office immediately. I have a trespasser who needs to be escorted off the premises." Spencer shot up from his chair, his face instantly turning a splotchy red. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, his patronizing facade shattering completely. "I am your brother-in-law. You cannot kick me out." "You are a parasite," I said, standing up and resting my hands flat on my desk, leaning toward him. "You are a 34-year-old man begging a black woman for $50,000 because you are too lazy to get a real job. You have zero revenue, zero product, and zero dignity. You think you can walk into my place of business, insult my life choices, and demand my money to save the house my parents are trying to steal for you. I am trying to save this family, you arrogant bitch," he shouted, taking a step toward my desk. "Your parents are going to lose everything because you are throwing a childish tantrum over a piece of paper." The heavy oak door swung open, and David, my 6'3" security guard, stepped into the room looking directly at Spencer. "Is there a problem, Ms. Camille?" David asked, his voice a deep rumble that instantly sucked the remaining bravado out of the room. "No problem, David," I said, maintaining intense eye contact with Spencer. "This gentleman was just leaving. Please make sure he gets all the way to the street and flag his face at the front desk. He is permanently banned from this building." Spencer looked at David, then back at me. His chest was heaving with humiliated rage. He knew he had overplayed his hand and lost spectacularly. He grabbed his phone from the edge of my desk and stormed toward the door. "You are going to regret this," he spat over his shoulder. I sat back down, pulled my keyboard closer, and resumed reviewing my contracts. "Have a lovely day, Spencer," I replied without looking up. I listened to his angry footsteps echoing down the hallway, followed closely by the heavy measured steps of my security guard. The office returned to its peaceful, quiet state. I felt no guilt. I felt no sorrow. I only felt the satisfying click of another trap snapping shut. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Spencer. I did not even have to unlock the screen to read the preview banner. "You think you are so smart. I am going to tell everyone the truth about you. I am going to make sure you are the most cursed and hated child in this entire family. You are dead to us." I picked up the phone, swiped the notification away, and smiled. He thought a threat of excommunication would break me, but he did not realize that being dead to them was the exact goal I was working toward. The smear campaign was about to begin, and I was absolutely ready for it. I never leave anything to chance. In luxury real estate, you learn very quickly that people will smile in your face while actively trying to ruin you behind your back. Information is the only true currency. So while Spencer was busy sending me empty threats from the sidewalk, I was already 3 steps ahead. On Wednesday afternoon, I sat at the long, polished mahogany table in my private conference room. Sitting across from me were 2 men I trusted more than my own blood. Julian was my forensic accountant, and Vaughn was a private investigator I kept on retainer for high-level corporate background checks. I had asked them to dig into the financial histories of my father and my brother-in-law. If I was going to be painted as the villain in this family, I wanted to know exactly who I was fighting. Julian slid a thick manila folder across the smooth surface of the table. He did not look happy. He opened the folder and pointed to a series of highlighted bank statements. These were from my father's private accounts, the ones he always claimed were tied up in complex retirement investments. "Reginald does not have a pension," Julian said, his voice low and serious. "He does not have an investment portfolio either. He blew through his entire retirement fund 4 years ago." I stared at the numbers on the page and asked him where the money went. Julian flipped to the next page, revealing a long list of wire transfers to offshore accounts and ATM cash withdrawals at various casinos. He confirmed it was underground sports betting. My father had been chasing a massive gambling debt for the better part of a decade. That was why they were on the verge of foreclosure 5 years ago before I stepped in. He did not make a bad business deal like he told me. He bet the house on football games and lost everything. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. For years, my father had lectured me about financial responsibility. He had stood in the pulpit of our church and talked about generational wealth. And all the while, he was secretly flushing his family legacy down the drain of illegal sportsbooks and expecting me to clean up the mess. But the revelations were not over. Vaughn, the investigator, cleared his throat and slid a second folder toward me. This one was thinner, but far more destructive. He told me there was no tech startup. The corporate entity Spencer registered 3 years ago had its license revoked for failing to file basic paperwork. He had 0 employees and 0 revenue, but he did have significant recurring expenses. Vaughn opened the folder and spread several high-resolution photographs across the table. They showed Spencer sitting at an upscale rooftop bar in Midtown. He was not pitching to investors. He was sitting very close to a young, blonde white woman who looked barely old enough to drink. In one photo, his hand was resting intimately on her bare thigh. Her name was Madison. Vaughn explained she was a 22-year-old college student. Spencer had been paying the rent on her luxury apartment in Buckhead for the past 14 months. It cost exactly $3,000 a month. He transferred the money to her directly from the joint checking account he shared with my sister Chloe. I traced the edge of the photograph with my index finger as the sickening reality set in. The financial web was completely laid bare before me. I transferred my hard-earned money to my parents to help them survive. My parents secretly handed that money over to Spencer to fund his fake business. And Spencer used that exact same money to fund a secret life with a sugar baby. He was using my sister's joint account to pay for his infidelity. And my sister was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage that she either did not notice or willfully ignored a $3,000 monthly leak in her own finances. For a brief fleeting moment, the armor cracked. I felt a sharp, agonizing pang in my chest. I closed my eyes and saw the ghost of the daughter I used to be. The daughter who skipped vacations to work double shifts. The daughter who felt guilty buying herself a designer handbag because she knew her parents' mortgage was due. The daughter who sacrificed her own peace of mind to build a safety net for a family that secretly despised her. I had poured my heart, my soul, and my bank account into a bottomless pit of lies, gambling debts, and betrayal. I had been bleeding myself dry to keep a sinking ship afloat, while the crew was busy stabbing me in the back. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the air deep into my lungs. I held it for 3 seconds. When I exhaled, the pain vanished. It evaporated into the air, leaving nothing but pure, unadulterated ice in its wake. There was no more room for grief. There was no more room for guilt. I was completely empty of familial loyalty, and in that emptiness, I found absolute power. I gathered the photographs and the bank statements, stacking them neatly into a single pile. I thanked Julian and Vaughn for their excellent work and assured them their invoices would be paid by the end of the day. Once they left the conference room, I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Elias, my lead real estate attorney. He picked up on the second ring. "Elias," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, "I need you to draft an official eviction notice for the property my parents are currently occupying. I also need the original quitclaim deed they signed 5 years ago, transferring the property to my LLC." I paused, looking down at the photos of Spencer and the gambling records of my father. "Put everything in a red folder," I instructed. "I want the deed, the eviction notice, and every single receipt of my financial contributions. I need it finalized, notarized, and sitting on my desk by tomorrow morning. The family is hosting a baby shower right before Thanksgiving, and I have a very special gift to deliver." By Friday of that week, the reality of my financial withdrawal finally hit my parents' mailbox. The bank does not care about your social status or your church reputation. They only care about cleared funds, and since my automated transfers were gone, the official default notices started arriving. I knew exactly what those envelopes looked like because I used to intercept them 5 years ago when I was desperately trying to save their credit. Now those same glaring red warnings were being delivered straight to their front door. My mother Diane realized that her demands and my father's intimidation tactics had failed completely. So she resorted to the only strategy she had left. She initiated a full-scale smear campaign. Sunday morning at our prominent megachurch was her grand stage. I did not attend service that day, but I did not need to be there to know exactly how her performance played out. According to the furious text messages I received later, My mother waited until the congregation was gathering for fellowship hour after the sermon. She positioned herself right in the center of the fellowship hall, ensuring she had the largest possible audience. Then she let the tears fall. She cried hysterically, clutching her chest, acting like a frail, elderly woman who had just been violently discarded. She told the church elders, my aunts and my uncles, that the devil had taken hold of my heart. She spun a tragic tale about how her eldest daughter had been blinded by corporate greed and city money. She claimed I had completely abandoned them in their old age simply because they gently suggested I should help my younger sister. She painted a picture of a heartless, materialistic woman who cared more about luxury real estate than her own flesh and blood. She completely left out the part where she and my father secretly wrote me out of their will. She conveniently forgot to mention that they had been using my money to fund Spencer's infidelity. She just played the victim, and the congregation ate it up. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was exploding. The flying monkeys had been unleashed. These were aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had never given me a single dime when I was struggling to start my business. These were the same relatives who gladly showed up to the cookouts I funded, drank the premium liquor I bought, and took home plates of food I paid for. Now they were suddenly moral authorities on family loyalty. My phone buzzed incessantly on my kitchen counter. I picked it up and scrolled through the barrage of hateful messages. Aunt Brenda wrote that I was a complete disgrace to Black women everywhere, and that God would punish me for disrespecting my parents. Uncle Thomas left a scathing voicemail telling me that money had turned me into a cold, bitter spinster, and that I would die completely alone. My cousin Jamal, who currently owed me $2,000 that I knew he would never repay, had the absolute nerve to text me saying I needed to humble myself and beg my mother for forgiveness. They called me selfish. They called me unnatural. They told me I was dead to the family. 5 years ago, reading those messages would have shattered my world. I would have spent hours drafting long emotional paragraphs, trying to explain my side of the story. I would have sent screenshots of bank statements, trying to prove my innocence to people who were completely committed to misunderstanding me. I would have begged for their love and validation. But as I stood in my kitchen looking at the vitriol pouring into my phone, I felt absolutely nothing. Their words had no power over me anymore. I realized that they did not actually care about my parents' well-being. They were just angry that the family cash cow had jumped the fence. They were terrified that if I could cut off my parents, they might be next. I did not reply to Aunt Brenda. I did not call Uncle Thomas back. I did not remind Jamal about his unpaid debt. Explaining myself to committed hypocrites is a complete waste of breath, and I was done wasting my resources on this family. Instead, I opened the massive family group chat. It had over 40 members, including everyone who had just spent the last 3 hours cursing my name. The chat was currently filled with passive-aggressive Bible verses and prayers for my supposedly lost soul. I tapped the text box. I did not write an essay. I did not defend my character or explain the financial abuse. I simply typed a single sentence. Make sure every single one of you attends Chloe's baby shower this coming Saturday because there will be a massive surprise and you will not want to miss it. I hit send. Within seconds, the typing bubbles of a dozen different relatives popped up on the screen. The passive-aggressive Bible verses stopped immediately, replaced by intense curiosity and confusion, but I did not stick around to read their replies. I closed the app, locked my phone, and walked into my home office. Sitting perfectly centered on my desk was the thick red folder my attorney Elias had delivered by courier that morning. It contained the quitclaim deed, the eviction notice, and 30 pages of undeniable financial receipts. The smear campaign was a cute attempt at manipulation, but my mother was playing checkers while I was playing chess. Saturday was rapidly approaching, and I was about to flip the entire board upside down. My single text message sent a massive shockwave through the entire family. But instead of feeling fear, they felt an overwhelming sense of entitled anticipation. In their twisted and delusional minds, they actually convinced themselves that my promised surprise meant a massive financial gift. My mother probably went right back to the church ladies and bragged that I had seen the error of my ways. She likely told everyone that I was planning to present Chloe with a massive trust fund for the baby or a giant novelty check to publicly apologize for my recent behavior. To maintain their flawless, wealthy image, they needed this baby shower to look like a millionaire was hosting it. But without my platinum credit card to swipe, they had to find the money elsewhere. My private investigator Vaughn sent me a brief update on Thursday evening that made me laugh out loud in my empty kitchen. Since I cut them off, Spencer had taken out a high-interest, short-term loan leveraging a fake business contract he mocked up on his computer. My father had drained the very last remaining $1,000 from his emergency overdraft account. They were literally borrowing money at 30% interest to buy custom pastel balloon arches, premium catered seafood, and a ridiculous throne made of white roses for Chloe to sit on. They were building a paper castle on top of a massive sinkhole, and they were using gasoline to put out a fire. Their strategy was painfully obvious to anyone paying attention. They wanted to create a massive spectacle of wealth and family unity. They were going to wait until the living room was packed shoulder to shoulder with every nosy aunt, every judgmental uncle, and all the gossiping church members. Then they would put me on the spot. They figured the intense social pressure of a beautiful baby shower would force me to open my checkbook and pay the mortgage right there in front of the crowd. They thought I would be too embarrassed to say no with 50 people watching. They were counting on my old, deeply ingrained habit of people-pleasing to save them from complete financial ruin. It was the exact same manipulation tactic they tried to use at the restaurant and the family cookout, but amplified to maximum volume. While they were busy picking out expensive macarons and ordering personalized champagne flutes with Spencer's borrowed money, I was sitting inside a sterile conference room with my attorney Elias. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background as he slid the final legal paperwork across the polished mahogany desk. I picked up my favorite gold pen and signed my name on the dotted line without a single ounce of hesitation. 5 years ago, when I saved my parents from their first foreclosure, they signed a quitclaim deed. That document legally transferred the absolute ownership of the property to my corporate entity in exchange for me paying off their massive arrears. For 5 years, I let them live there rent-free while I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance. Legally speaking, they were nothing more than my tenants. And as of today, they were tenants who had officially overstayed their welcome. Elias handed me the official document stamped and approved by a Fulton County judge. It was a formal notice of eviction, giving them exactly 30 days to vacate my property. I took the quitclaim deed, the eviction notice, the photographs of Spencer's mistress, and the undeniable financial ledgers, and I placed them all neatly into a heavy red folder. I thanked Elias for his discretion and left the office feeling like a general preparing for the final battle of a long and exhausting war. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and a crisp autumn breeze blowing through Atlanta. The baby shower was scheduled to officially begin at noon. At 9 in the morning, caterers began arriving at the house carrying heavy trays of expensive food. Florists were busy setting up massive floral arrangements on the front porch and tying silk ribbons to the railings. Chloe was inside the master bedroom, probably getting her hair and makeup done by a professional styling team that Spencer could not actually afford to pay. My mother was surely pacing the hardwood floors, adjusting the decorations, barking orders at my father, and waiting for her grand moment of triumph. Everything looked absolutely perfect and wealthy from the outside. But at exactly 10:30 in the morning, a plain gray sedan pulled up to the curb and parked right behind the florist's van. A man in a simple polo shirt and slacks stepped out holding a metal clipboard and a bright red piece of paper. He was a registered process server for the county court. He walked right past the busy florists, ignored the caterers carrying trays of shrimp cocktail, and marched straight up the front steps of my house. My mother was too busy in the backyard, directing the setup of the white rose throne to notice him approach. The man peeled the backing off a heavy-duty adhesive strip and slapped the glaring red eviction notice directly onto the center of the freshly painted front door. It was impossible to miss. He took a quick photograph of the notice on the door for his legal records, turned around, and walked calmly back to his car. The trap was fully set. The bomb was armed and ticking. The perfectly curated facade of their wealthy lifestyle was about to violently collide with the cold, hard reality of the law. I picked up my red folder, grabbed my car keys, and walked out to my Porsche. All I had to do now was drive over there, walk through the front door, and watch the entire fake empire burn to the ground. The first guests to arrive for the baby shower were predictably the loudest and most judgmental members of our family and church congregation. These were the exact same people who had spent the previous 48 hours blowing up my phone with hateful messages calling me a selfish disgrace. They arrived in their pastel dresses and linen suits, carrying expensive gifts wrapped in shiny silver paper, completely ready to celebrate my sister and judge my absence. But they did not even make it through the front door. Aunt Brenda was the first one to walk up the driveway. She marched up the concrete steps, ready to admire the massive floral arrangements, but stopped dead in her tracks. The bright red legal document was practically glowing against the fresh white paint of the front door. The heavy-duty adhesive the process server used made it look like a permanent fixture. Aunt Brenda pulled her reading glasses out of her purse and leaned in close. The bold black letters at the top of the page left absolutely no room for interpretation. Official notice of eviction. Within 10 minutes, a crowd had formed on the front porch. First Lady Thomas arrived with a massive diaper cake and immediately joined the huddle of whispering women. Uncle Thomas, who had left me that scathing voicemail about dying alone, was now standing on the lawn, pointing at the paper with his mouth hanging wide open. Nobody knocked on the door. Nobody went inside to greet the expectant mother. They just stood there reading the legal jargon, passing the gossip around like a tray of hors d'oeuvres. They were reading the harsh, undeniable reality that Reginald and Diane did not own this beautiful home. They were just tenants, and they were being kicked out. Inside the house, my family was completely oblivious to the spectacle unfolding on their porch. My mother, Diane, had been waiting for the doorbell to ring so she could make a grand entrance. When she realized a crowd was gathering outside without coming in, she finally pulled the heavy front door open with a wide, practiced smile. "Welcome, everyone," she announced, throwing her arms open. Her greeting was met with absolute dead silence. Aunt Brenda took a step back, clutching her purse to her chest. First Lady Thomas looked down at her shoes. My mother, confused by their cold reaction, stepped forward and finally turned around to look at the front of her own door. I was not there to see the exact moment her perfectly curated world shattered, but I heard the details later from a cousin who could not wait to tell me. My mother let out a high-pitched gasp that sounded like she was choking on air. She clawed at the red paper, trying to rip it off the wood, but the adhesive was too strong. It only tore the edges, leaving the main body of the eviction notice proudly displayed for the entire neighborhood to read. "What is going on out here?" Chloe yelled, waddling into the foyer in her tight maternity dress. When she saw the crowd staring at them with a mixture of pity and shock, she pushed past my mother and read the notice herself. The ultimate golden child, who had spent the entire morning getting her hair and makeup professionally done for Instagram photos, immediately suffered a total meltdown. She began hyperventilating. Thick black streaks of expensive mascara ran down her cheeks, completely ruining her flawless makeup. She screamed for her husband. Spencer came rushing out of the house holding a glass of champagne. When he saw the word eviction, he went into full panic mode, but tried to mask it with his usual arrogant bravado. He puffed out his chest and started yelling at the church members, telling them it was a massive administrative error. "This is a mistake," he shouted, waving his arms. "My company is handling a massive real estate transaction, and the bank got the addresses confused. My lawyers are going to sue the city for this. We are going to own the bank by Monday morning." Nobody believed him. The church ladies just exchanged knowing glances. The facade was completely broken. My father, Reginald, was the last one to reach the door. He pushed his way through the foyer, took one look at the legal document, and felt the blood drain from his face. He knew this was not a bank error. He knew exactly what this was. He turned around, walked straight into his home office, and locked the door behind him. While my sister was crying hysterically on the porch and my brother-in-law was making empty threats to the sky, my father pulled out his phone. I was cruising down the highway in my Porsche Panamera, listening to a classical piano concerto, when my dashboard screen lit up. It was Reginald. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, he called again. I took a slow sip of my iced coffee and kept my eyes on the road. By the time I took the exit for their affluent suburban neighborhood, the screen displayed exactly 15 missed calls. He was desperate. He was terrified. The patriarch who had sworn to burn the house down before giving it to me was now frantically begging for me to answer the phone. I turned onto their street and immediately saw the chaos. Cars were parked haphazardly along both sides of the road. A crowd of well-dressed guests was spilling off the front porch onto the manicured lawn. The caterers had stopped serving food and were just standing by their vans watching the drama unfold. The pastel balloon arches fluttered in the autumn wind, looking incredibly out of place against the backdrop of a family having a public breakdown. I slowed my car down and let the deep purr of the Porsche engine announce my arrival. Heads began to turn. The whispering stopped. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as I smoothly glided the sleek black car right up to the front of the driveway, blocking Spencer's leased SUV. I put the car in park and killed the engine. I took a moment to look at myself in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a pristine white tailored power suit with subtle gold accents that screamed success and untouchable authority. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, sleek bun. I looked completely unbothered, and dangerously calm. I picked up the heavy red folder sitting on the passenger seat. I pushed the car door open and stepped out onto the pavement. The click of my designer heels echoed in the sudden dead silence of the neighborhood. Every single eye was locked on me. Aunt Brenda, Uncle Thomas, First Lady Thomas, and all the cousins who had cursed my name just hours ago were now staring at me in absolute awe and terror. Chloe stopped crying and just stood on the porch with her mouth open. Spencer took a step back, his fake bravado evaporating the second he saw the red folder in my hand. I did not smile. I did not wave. I walked slowly and deliberately up the driveway, letting the crisp autumn wind catch the edge of my white blazer. I walked right past the expensive catering vans. I walked right past the whispering church ladies. I walked through the crowd of hypocrites like a queen marching onto a battlefield to execute her final judgment. And as I reached the bottom of the porch stairs, I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes and prepared to drop the final bomb. I stepped past my mother and walked through the heavy wooden front door, leaving the loud murmurs of the crowd behind me. The air inside the house felt thick and suffocating. The massive living room that my mother usually kept in pristine condition looked like a disaster zone. Trays of expensive, untouched catered food sat on the glass coffee table. Pastel-colored balloons floated near the ceiling, looking like a cruel joke against the grim reality of the room. Every eye snapped toward me the moment my designer heels clicked against the hardwood floor. My father Reginald was standing in the center of the room, his face a deep shade of crimson, fueled by a mixture of absolute rage and sheer panic. My mother Diane had collapsed into an armchair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing loudly to garner sympathy from anyone watching. My sister Chloe stood near a ridiculous chair decorated with white roses, her expensive makeup completely ruined by her tears. And of course Spencer, my useless white brother-in-law, stood with his arms crossed, trying to look intimidating, but his cowardly eyes were darting around looking for an exit. The second Reginald saw me, he charged forward like a cornered animal. "What the hell did you do, Camille?" he roared, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "Are you trying to destroy this family's reputation in front of the entire church board? Get your checkbook out right now. I do not care which account you use, but you are going to call the bank and pay off every single dime of that arrears immediately. You are going to make them take that humiliating paper off my front door before this day is over. You are the oldest child, and you need to act responsibly." I stopped exactly 3 feet away from him. My eyes coldly scanned the expensive tailored suit he was wearing. A suit that was paid for with my platinum credit card just 3 months ago. I did not blink. I did not take a single step back. I just stood there letting my pristine white power suit radiate an undeniable authority that unconsciously forced him to lower his voice. "Did you not hear me?" He hissed through his teeth, his hands balling into fists. "Pay the bank right now. You have a responsibility to fix this mess. You carry my last name and you are not allowed to drag this family through the mud." Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Spencer stepped forward, positioning himself in front of Chloe, like he was some kind of valiant hero protecting his fragile family. "You are a truly evil person, Camille," he said, his voice dripping with condescension and disgust. "You did all of this because you are jealous, are you not? You are jealous that Chloe is carrying my child. You are jealous that we are building a beautiful family while you are just a bitter, lonely woman who nobody wants. You purposely orchestrated this on the day of the baby shower to ruin the only happiness this family has. You do not even deserve to be called a sister. All of this goes away if you just open your heart and help your family." My mother chimed in from her armchair, wailing loudly. "Oh Lord, what did I do wrong to raise such a cold-blooded daughter? She wants to kill her own parents. She wants to throw us out on the street and watch us starve. She has been jealous of her sister since they were little girls, and now she wants to destroy her special day." I let them scream. I let them point fingers, cast blame, and play the ultimate victims for several long minutes. I listened to every insult, every lie, and every completely delusional demand without a single muscle in my face twitching. When their cheap theatrical performance finally started to lose its momentum, and they ran out of breath, I slowly walked right past my father. I took slow, deliberate, confident strides straight toward the premium suede sofa, positioned directly in the center of the living room. I sat down gracefully, crossed my legs, and placed the bright red folder onto the glass coffee table. The crowd of relatives hovering in the hallway leaned in closer, their curiosity overriding their manners. A dead silence fell over the room once again. Every single pair of eyes was glued to that red folder, like it was a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. I slowly looked up and locked eyes with my father, whose face was already losing its angry color. Then I shifted my gaze to Spencer, who was standing frozen in place. Finally, I looked right at my precious golden child of a sister, who was still used to being shielded from reality. "You are ordering me to pay the bank to save this house?" I asked, my voice perfectly even and brutally clear. Every word echoed in the quiet room like a hammer hitting solid ice. "You want me to use my hard-earned money to protect this fake kingdom just so you can maintain your phony social status in front of those gossiping church members outside? Do you think I am your personal endless ATM machine?" "Yes," my father shouted back, but his voice had lost all its power and genuine fear was creeping into his eyes. "That is your duty. You make the money so you provide for the family." I let out a soft chuckle, a laugh filled with every ounce of contempt I had buried for the last 35 years. I calmly opened the red folder and pulled out a neatly stapled document. I slammed the papers down onto the glass table with a sharp smack that made everyone jump. "You want me to save the house that you just willed entirely to these two parasites?" I asked, raising my voice so every single syllable was razor sharp. It was the notarized copy of the will I had found on his desk a month ago. The front page was completely visible, exposing their cruel and calculated favoritism for the entire room to see. The nosy relatives standing in the hallway collectively gasped. I saw Aunt Brenda cover her mouth in pure shock. This was the dark family secret my parents had desperately tried to hide. I pointed directly at the legal document. "You explicitly wrote that I was too strong and independent to need anything from this family. You decided to hand all of your assets, including this very house, over to my useless sister and her garbage husband so they could build their little nest. So why are you screaming at me to pay the debt? If Chloe and Spencer are the sole heirs to this empire, then let the heirs pull out their wallets and pay the mortgage. Why are you calling the daughter you legally erased from your legacy?" My father's face turned completely ashen. All the blood drained from his cheeks. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seemed to freeze. My mother stopped her fake crying, instantly staring at the will on the table with genuine terror. Chloe took a step back, clutching her pregnant belly as if she had just been physically slapped. Spencer swallowed hard and awkwardly stepped forward. "That was just future estate planning," he stammered, trying to spin a ridiculous lie. "They just wanted to secure the baby's future. Right now, this house still belongs to your parents and you have an obligation to help them. You cannot do this." I laughed out loud, a bright, victorious sound that filled the room. "The future?" I asked, standing up and glaring at the pathetic man standing before me. "Did you really think I was going to keep paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and the maintenance on this house for the next 20 years, just waiting for my parents to die so you two could move in for free? Did you think I was that incredibly stupid, Spencer? This entire family has treated me like an emotionless bank account for years. But that game is officially over." I looked around at the stunned faces in the living room. Their boundless greed and toxic hypocrisy had been completely stripped away in front of an audience. But I was not done yet. The most painful truth, the absolute ultimate punishment, was still sitting inside my red folder, and I was more than ready to extinguish the very last shred of hope they had left. My father, Reginald, puffed out his chest, trying to summon whatever scrap of authority he thought he still possessed. He stepped around the coffee table, pointing his finger at me again. "You listen to me, Camille," he barked, his voice echoing in the silent living room. "I bought this house 30 years ago. I paid the down payment when you were just a toddler. My name is on the original mortgage. This is my property and I have every right to decide who gets it when I pass away. It is my right as the head of this household, and no amount of your arrogant corporate attitude is going to change that." My mother, Diane, immediately jumped in, nodding her head vigorously. "That is right," she cried, pointing a manicured nail at me. "We built this family legacy with our own two hands. We let you help out with the monthly payments because you owe us for raising you. But you do not own us, and you certainly do not own this house. You are just a bitter, jealous child trying to confuse us with legal paperwork because you cannot stand to see your sister happy." Chloe chimed in from the corner, sniffing loudly and wiping her ruined makeup. "You are so pathetic, Camille," she whined. "You think because you have a little bit of money, you can just bully mom and dad in their own home. It is their house. They can give it to whoever they want." I sat back against the premium suede sofa and let out a bright, radiant laugh. It was a genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement that bubbled up from the very bottom of my chest. The sound of my joy in the middle of their chaotic meltdown was incredibly jarring. They all stopped talking and stared at me like I had completely lost my mind. "Their home?" I asked, wiping a dramatic tear of laughter from the corner of my eye. "Your property. Your family legacy." I leaned forward, uncrossed my legs, and reached back into the red folder. I pulled out a thick packet of legal paper, bound with a blue legal cover. It was stamped heavily with the official seal of the Fulton County Records Office. I held it up for a brief moment, letting the bright overhead lights catch the gold foil of the county seal before I tossed it onto the glass coffee table right next to their ridiculous will. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "That is a certified copy of a quitclaim deed," I announced, my voice ringing out with absolute crystal-clear precision. "I want you to read it very carefully, Reginald. I want you to look right at the bottom of the second page." My father hesitated, his eyes darting between my confident face and the document on the table. He slowly reached down and picked up the packet. His eyes scanned the first page, and I could see his brow furrowing in confusion. He flipped to the second page. "Let me refresh your memory, since you seem to be suffering from selective amnesia." I continued, projecting my voice so every single relative standing in the hallway could hear the absolute truth. 5 years ago, you were drowning. You had gambled away your retirement fund on underground sports betting. You were 6 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank was literally days away from putting this house up for public auction. You came to my office crying, begging me to save you from complete public humiliation. You needed exactly $150,000 to clear the arrears and stop the foreclosure. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked around frantically at the church members in the hall, realizing her perfect Christian image was being shredded in real time. "I did not give you a loan," I stated coldly, standing up from the sofa. "I am a luxury real estate broker. I do not throw six figures at bad investments. I told you I would pay the bank directly, but only if you signed over the total ownership of the property to me. You were so desperate, so panicked, and so incredibly ignorant of basic financial law that you signed the paperwork without even reading the fine print." I pointed at the paper in my father's trembling hands. "That quitclaim deed legally transferred 100% of the ownership rights from you to my corporate LLC. For the last 5 years, I have paid the mortgage. I have paid the property taxes. I have paid the homeowner's insurance, and you have been nothing more than my tenants living here completely rent-free." The air in the living room was sucked out completely. The silence was so profound I could hear the gentle rustle of the pastel balloons rubbing against the ceiling. "You do not own this house," I said, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper. "You have not owned this house for half a decade. You are tenants, guests in my property. And yet you had the absolute unmitigated gall to hire an estate lawyer and draft a will attempting to leave my house to my useless sister and her broke husband. You tried to will my property to someone else." My father stood frozen in the center of the room. His eyes were locked on the bottom of the second page. His hands began to shake violently, making the thick legal paper rattle in the quiet room. He was staring at his own signature, his bold, loopy handwriting placed right next to my mother's signature, right above the official notary stamp. The reality of his own ignorance was crashing down on him like a tidal wave. For 5 years he had strutted around this house acting like the king of the castle, demanding respect and financial tribute from me, while secretly planning to betray me. But in reality, he was just a squatter living entirely by my grace. "This is fake," Spencer suddenly yelled, stepping forward, his voice cracking with desperation. "This has to be illegal. You manipulated them. You tricked them into signing it. No judge is going to uphold this." I slowly turned my head and looked at Spencer as if he were a cockroach that had just scurried across the floor. "Tricked them," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "They signed it in front of a licensed notary public and their own banking representative. It has been filed with the county for 5 years. But please, Spencer, by all means hire a lawyer and challenge it. Oh wait, you cannot afford a lawyer, can you? Because you just blew your last borrowed dollar on a custom white rose throne for a baby shower in a house you are about to be kicked out of." Chloe let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail and collapsed onto the floor, clutching the edge of the coffee table. She finally understood. There was no inheritance. There was no free house waiting for her. Her entire future built on the expectation of stealing my wealth had just evaporated into thin air. My mother, Diane, fell out of her armchair and crawled over to my father, grabbing his arm. "Tell me she is lying. Reginald," she sobbed hysterically, pulling at his expensive suit jacket. "Tell me it is a trick. Tell me we still own our home." But Reginald could not speak. He just kept staring at the quitclaim deed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The proud, arrogant patriarch, who had threatened to burn the house to the ground rather than give it to me, was completely broken. His towering ego collapsed into dust under the crushing weight of undeniable legal receipts. He slowly looked up from the paper and met my eyes. The look of absolute defeat and terror on his face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The game was over, and checkmate belonged entirely to me. Spencer refused to back down. The sheer arrogance of a man who had been coddled his entire life would not allow him to accept this humiliating defeat in front of such a large audience, especially a defeat handed to him by a black woman he had constantly patronized. His face turned an alarming shade of red. He waved his arms wildly in the air and pointed a trembling index finger right at my face. "These are entirely fake!" he screamed, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to reclaim his stolen authority. "You are running a scam. There is not a single court in the United States that will recognize this garbage document, Camille. I am going to hire the best lawyers in the city of Atlanta. I am going to sue you into the ground. I will prove that you psychologically manipulated the elderly to force them into signing away their assets. I am going to win this house back for my family, and you are going to be on your knees apologizing to us in open court." I stared at him without blinking. His desperation was genuinely pathetic. He was trying to use his unearned privilege to intimidate me, but he forgot that in this room, legal receipts were the only reigning monarch. "The best lawyers in the city," I repeated, enunciating every single word with an icy calm that made the entire room hold its breath. "That is fascinating, Spencer. And exactly where do you plan to get the money to pay for these top-tier attorneys? Are you going to use the revenue from your imaginary tech company that has never secured a single client? Or are you going to use the predatory 30% interest loan you took out yesterday just to buy that ridiculous white rose throne sitting in the backyard?" "I have my ways," he hissed, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "You just wait and see." I shook my head slowly and reached my hand back into the red folder for the second time. I had been waiting for this exact moment for weeks. "Oh, I know you have very creative ways of managing your cash flow, Spencer," I said, pulling out a stack of crisp, high-resolution photographs and a bank statement that had been heavily marked with bright yellow highlighter. I did not throw them onto the glass table this time. I held them in my hand and took slow, deliberate steps toward the corner where Chloe was still sitting on the floor in absolute shock. I dropped the stack of photographs directly into my precious golden sister's lap. They were incredibly clear close-up shots taken by a professional private investigator. Spencer was holding a very young blonde woman at an exclusive rooftop bar in Midtown Atlanta. The respectable brother-in-law's hand was resting in an undeniably intimate position on the young woman's bare thigh. His flirtatious gaze and satisfied smile were captured by the camera lens without missing a single damning detail. "Look very closely, Chloe," I commanded, my voice echoing through the living room. Chloe, trembling violently, picked up one of the photographs. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers and her breath hitched in her throat. The crocodile tears from earlier were instantly replaced by genuine paralyzing shock. "Her name is Madison," I announced loudly enough for the entire living room and the gossiping aunts in the hallway to hear every single syllable. "She is 22 years old. She is still a college student." And this, I said, dropping the highlighted bank statement right next to the photos, "is the transaction history proving that your wonderful husband has been transferring exactly $3,000 every single month to pay for her luxury apartment. Guess where that money is coming from? It is being withdrawn directly from the joint checking account you share with him, Chloe. You are pregnant and stressing over the cost of party favors, while your husband is using your money to fund his mistress." Spencer looked like he had just been struck by lightning. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over the edge of the expensive area rug, and began stammering incoherently. "Camille, where did you get those? That is an invasion of privacy." "You were planning to use your money to hire a lawyer to sue me," I interrupted him, letting out a sharp scoff of pure disgust. "Use the money you are spending on that 22-year-old girl." "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, turning my attention back to my sister's crumpled face. "You do not just have an imaginary inheritance. You have a very real betrayal staring you right in the face. Your visionary entrepreneurial husband is actually just a low-level grifter using his own wife's savings to play sugar daddy." The whispers from the hallway instantly transformed into loud gasps of pure horror. Sister Williams and First Lady Thomas, who had been aggressively criticizing me just hours ago, were now covering their mouths and staring at Spencer with absolute disgust. Nobody cared about whether I was a bad daughter anymore. Their attention had completely shifted to the shameful infidelity of this supposedly perfect family. Chloe slowly stood up from the floor. She was no longer crying. It seemed that the sudden collapse of her imaginary wealth, combined with the blatant betrayal by the husband she worshipped, had finally pushed her completely past her breaking point. Humiliation and unadulterated rage exploded in her eyes like an erupting volcano. Without saying a single word, Chloe lunged straight at Spencer like a wounded wild animal. "You miserable bastard," she screamed, tearing the tense atmosphere to shreds. She swung her hand and slapped him across the face so hard the sound echoed sharply in the room. "You dare take my money to fund that tramp? You told me you were at investor meetings." Spencer threw his hands up to protect his face, backing away toward the piano, while pleading desperately. "Chloe, calm down and let me explain. It is not what you think it is just a massive misunderstanding." But Chloe had completely lost her mind. She clawed at him, screaming the worst profanities imaginable. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from the table and threw it directly at his chest. The glass shattered, spilling sticky alcohol all over his designer shirt. She grabbed a plate of catered appetizers and hurled it at his head. My father, Reginald, and my mother, Diane, stood completely paralyzed, not knowing how to intervene. The flawless moral family image they had spent decades building was being violently destroyed right in front of their eyes. My father clutched his chest, breathing heavily, while my mother collapsed back into her chair, sobbing miserably, but nobody was paying any attention to her anymore. Not a single guest from the hallway stepped into the room to help or break up the fight. Instead, a dozen different smartphones were immediately pulled out. Camera flashes blinked rapidly and screens glowed as the church members recorded every single second of this horrifying spectacle. The fake perfection of their family had been torn into tiny, pathetic pieces. Every mask had been ripped off, exposing the rot, the greed, and the lies underneath. I stood there coldly watching their empire burn itself to the ground, feeling an absolute and total freedom I had never experienced in my entire life. The living room was a symphony of absolute destruction. Chloe was still screaming at the top of her lungs, hurling every insult she could think of at Spencer, who was desperately trying to wipe sticky champagne and cocktail sauce off his face while slowly backing toward the hallway. The church members were still recording every humiliating second of the domestic dispute, their phone cameras capturing the exact moment the golden child's perfect life shattered into a million pieces. But my mother, Diane, had finally stopped watching her precious daughter's marriage implode. She suddenly realized that the real tragedy unfolding in this room was not Spencer's infidelity. The real tragedy was that she was about to be homeless. She pushed herself off the floor, leaving my father Reginald wheezing against the wall by the armchair, and scrambled across the expensive Persian rug. She did not just walk over to me. She threw herself entirely at my feet. The proud church matriarch, who had spent her entire life worrying about her pristine reputation, judging others, and demanding absolute respect, dropped heavily onto her knees right in front of me. She reached out with her manicured hands and grabbed the hem of my white tailored blazer. Her face was a wet, swollen mask of ruined makeup and sheer desperation. "Camille, please," she wailed, her voice cracking under the massive weight of her own panic. "Please, my beautiful girl, my sweet firstborn daughter. You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We made a terrible mistake. Reginald was stressed about money, and we were just confused when we wrote that will. We never meant to hurt you. Please do not throw us out on the street. I am begging you, Camille. I am your mother." I looked down at the pathetic woman kneeling on the floor, clinging to my clothes like a drowning sailor clinging to a piece of driftwood. For 35 years, I had deeply craved her affection. I had spent my entire adult life working myself to the bone, sacrificing my own happiness, just to hear her call me her beautiful girl. If she had done this a year ago, or even a month ago, I probably would have burst into tears. I would have dropped to my knees right next to her, hugged her tightly, and promised to fix everything. I would have opened my checkbook, paid the bank, and bought my way back into her conditional love. But looking at her now, as she groveled on the floor, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of empathy inside my heart had completely dried up, leaving nothing but cold, hard logic. Her tears were not falling, because she was sorry for betraying me. She was not crying, because she realized she had been a terrible mother. She was crying because the endless gravy train had finally derailed, and she was staring down the barrel of public humiliation and poverty. I gently but firmly placed my hands on her wrists and pried her fingers off the crisp fabric of my suit. I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to look up at me from her position on the floor. "You did not make a mistake," I said, my voice completely devoid of any anger or sadness. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill or burning the Thanksgiving turkey. Secretly hiring an estate lawyer and drafting a legal document to steal my property so you could hand it over to your favorite child is a calculated betrayal. You never saw me as your daughter Diane. You only ever saw me as an ATM. I was just a mindless machine that dispensed cash whenever you pressed the right buttons of guilt and religious obligation." "No, that is not true," she sobbed, reaching for my legs again, but missing as I took another step back. "We love you. You are our blood. You are our family. You cannot evict your own family. You loved what I could provide." I corrected her, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "You loved the luxury cars, the country club lunches, the expensive hair salon appointments, and the bragging rights you paraded around the church. But the ATM is permanently out of service. You have exactly 30 days. The eviction notice on the front door is completely legally binding. I suggest you spend the next 4 weeks packing up your designer clothes instead of crying on the floor. On the 31st day, the county sheriff will arrive to change the locks. Do not make the police come here and physically throw your belongings onto the front lawn in front of the entire neighborhood." Diane let out a guttural scream of anguish and collapsed forward, burying her face in the rug. She knew I was serious. She knew there was no manipulating her way out of a court-ordered eviction. I turned my attention away from her and looked at my father one last time. Reginald was leaning heavily against the wall, his hands shaking, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. He looked like he had aged 20 years in the last 10 minutes. The tyrannical patriarch who used to terrorize me with his loud voice and his demands for respect was completely castrated by the reality of his own financial incompetence. He did not say a single word to me. He did not try to argue or threaten me anymore. He just stood there, a broken, empty shell of a man who had gambled away his legacy and lost. I picked up my empty red folder from the glass coffee table. I left the damning photographs, the highlighted bank statements, the certified quitclaim deed, and the fake will spread out across the glass like the ruins of a fallen empire. I wanted them to have to look at their own failures every single time they walked through this living room for the next 30 days. I turned my back on my family and walked slowly toward the front door. The massive crowd of nosy relatives and church members blocking the hallway instantly parted for me like the Red Sea. Aunt Brenda, Uncle Thomas, and First Lady Thomas pressed themselves against the walls, trying to get as far away from me as possible. Nobody dared to whisper a single word of criticism. Nobody tried to quote a Bible verse about forgiveness. They lowered their smartphones and watched me in terrified silence. They finally understood exactly who they were dealing with. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter they could walk all over. I was the landlord, and I was collecting my dues. I walked through the foyer and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The bright red eviction notice was still glowing proudly on the front door, fluttering slightly in the wind. I walked down the long paved driveway toward my car, leaving the front door wide open behind me. The house that had once been my personal prison, the place where I was constantly belittled compared to my sister and drained of my resources, was no longer a place of power. It was just an empty shell waiting to be reclaimed. As I pressed the button on my keys and unlocked my Porsche, I paused for a brief moment to listen. I could hear the chaotic symphony echoing from the open doorway. Chloe was screaming wildly at Spencer, breaking more glass. Spencer was making pathetic, desperate excuses, trying to save his own skin, and my mother was wailing in pure, unfiltered despair. It was the beautiful, tragic sound of greedy parasites finally realizing that their host had walked away forever. The next 4 weeks were an absolute masterclass in watching karma collect its long overdue debts. I did not have to lift another finger or say another word. The truth had been unleashed in that living room, and it acted like a highly contagious virus, rapidly dismantling every single lie my family had ever told. The 30-day countdown on the eviction notice was not just a legal time frame. It was the exact amount of time it took for their fake empire to completely turn to dust. Let us start with my parents. For decades, they had built their entire identity around being the moral and financial pillars of our affluent megachurch. But the video of the baby shower disaster spread through the congregation faster than a wildfire. Aunt Brenda and First Lady Thomas made sure every single member of the choir, the usher board, and the pastoral council saw the footage of Spencer being exposed, and my father standing in stunned silence over a legal deed. The illusion of their wealth was shattered instantly. My parents tried to show up to Sunday service the following week, pretending everything was perfectly normal. They walked into the sanctuary wearing their Sunday best, expecting the usual warm greetings and respectful nods. Instead, they were met with a wall of absolute freezing silence. People actually got up and moved to different pews when they sat down. The pastor did not greet them at the door. The church elders completely ignored them during fellowship hour. They had been exposed as frauds who lived off their discarded daughter and secretly tried to steal her property. The shame was far too much for their massive, fragile egos to handle. They walked out of the church before the sermon even started, and they never went back again. Without my money to shield them, the harsh reality of their financial ruin hit them like a runaway freight train. On the 30th day, exactly as I had promised, I drove past the house one last time to make sure they were actually leaving. I parked my car down the street and watched through the windshield. There were no professional movers in crisp uniforms. There was only a rusted, dented rental truck parked on the beautiful paved driveway. I watched my father, Reginald, the man who used to demand absolute respect and obedience, struggling to carry cheap cardboard boxes out the front door. His shoulders were slumped, his back was bent, and he looked completely defeated. My mother, Diane, was dragging black plastic trash bags filled with designer clothes she could no longer afford to dry clean. They were moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The luxury lifestyle they tried to steal was firmly in my rearview mirror forever. My sister Chloe faced a completely different kind of nightmare. The golden child who had never worked a hard day in her life suddenly found herself entirely alone in the real world. The day after the baby shower, the predatory lenders Spencer had borrowed from started calling her phone aggressively, demanding their money. Then came the ultimate neighborhood humiliation. In the middle of the night, a heavy-duty tow truck backed into the driveway with its bright yellow lights flashing, waking up all the neighbors. They repossessed Spencer's luxury SUV. The entire street watched through their blinds as the shiny symbol of his fake tech startup was dragged away, sparking against the asphalt. When Chloe finally realized that there was no secret fortune, no tech company, and no free mansion waiting for her, she filed for divorce. She packed whatever she could fit into the trunk of her small car and left him. But she had nowhere to go. My parents could not take her in because they were being evicted themselves. For the first time in her 32 years of life, Chloe had to figure out how to survive on her own. I heard through the relentless family grapevine that she ended up renting a dingy, rundown motel room, paying by the week. The girl who was supposed to inherit a $1 million home was now sitting in a room that smelled of stale smoke and peeling wallpaper, desperately applying for entry-level retail jobs so she could afford baby formula. As for Spencer, he completely vanished. He abandoned his pregnant wife and fled the state, terrified of the debt collectors and the angry investors he had scammed. His 22-year-old mistress dumped him the very second the $3,000 monthly transfers stopped clearing. He became a ghost, running from his own pathetic shadow. I sat in my car and watched my father close the back of the rusted moving truck. He pulled down the heavy metal door and locked it with a cheap padlock. The loud metallic clank echoed down the quiet suburban street, marking the official end of their reign. They climbed into the cab of the truck, the engine sputtering and coughing out dark smoke before they slowly drove away, leaving my property completely empty. I did not feel a single ounce of pity as I put my Porsche into drive and headed back toward the city limits. I was not focused on the ruins of their lives. I was focused entirely on the empire I was building for myself. An hour later, I was standing in a massive sunlit boardroom on the top floor of a high-rise building in downtown Atlanta. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking view of the bustling city I was conquering. The air smelled of rich leather and fresh espresso, a stark contrast to the stale toxicity of my previous life. Sitting across the polished mahogany table from me were three major commercial investors. We were finalizing the acquisition of a massive retail plaza. My attorney Elias smiled warmly and slid a thick stack of crisp contracts toward me. I pulled my favorite gold pen from my blazer pocket. I thought about the forged will my parents had tried to use against me to secure their golden child's future. I thought about the fake businesses, the borrowed money, and the endless manipulation. And then I looked down at the legitimate multi-million-dollar contract sitting right in front of me. I clicked the pen and signed my name on the dotted line, sealing the biggest commercial deal of my entire career. My family had tried to bury me under the weight of their expectations. They tried to drain my resources and leave me with absolutely nothing. But they forgot that I was the one who bought the shovel, and I owned the dirt. I had traded the heavy, suffocating chains of their toxic obligations for a life of absolute brilliant freedom. I shook hands with the investors celebrating the monumental victory. The contrast was beautifully poetic. While my parents were driving a broken-down truck toward a life of poverty and isolation, I was standing at the absolute peak of my success, surrounded by people who respected my worth and valued my intelligence. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of that suffocating living room and left my biological family to face the absolute reality of their own disastrous choices. Today is Thanksgiving. For my entire adult life, Thanksgiving was a holiday that filled me with a paralyzing sense of dread and anxiety. In the past, Thanksgiving meant waking up at 6 in the morning to stand in a hot kitchen, cooking a massive feast for dozens of ungrateful relatives. It meant paying for every single ingredient from the organic turkey to the premium liquor, while my sister Chloe sat in the living room taking selfies and my mother criticized my seasoning. It meant sitting at a dining table I paid for, listening to my father boast about his fake investments, and then enduring the inevitable passive-aggressive comments about why a successful woman like me was still single. It meant carrying the heavy financial and emotional burden of the strong black woman trope while being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. But tonight, the narrative is completely and beautifully different. I am standing on the expansive wraparound balcony of my brand new penthouse apartment, located right in the highest tier of Midtown Atlanta. The crisp, cool autumn air brushes gently against my face, and the sprawling city stretches out beneath me like a glittering, endless ocean of gold and white lights. The view is absolutely breathtaking. I am holding a heavy crystal glass filled with an incredibly expensive vintage red wine, and I am wearing a stunning emerald green silk dress that I bought simply because it caught my eye in a boutique window. I did not have to check my bank account first to make sure my parents' mortgage was covered. I did not have to calculate how much of my commission I needed to set aside to fund my brother-in-law's next imaginary business venture. I did not have to feel a single ounce of guilt for spending my own hard-earned money on myself. For the first time in my 35 years on this earth, my resources, my time, and my peace of mind belong exclusively to me. Behind me, the massive floor-to-ceiling glass doors are slid wide open, letting the warm, inviting sounds of my new reality drift out onto the balcony. My dining room is completely full, but the people sitting around my custom-made solid oak table are not the people who share my bloodline. They are my chosen family. They are my closest friends, my fiercely loyal business partners, my mentors, and the incredible women who actually supported me when I was building my commercial real estate brokerage from the absolute ground up. I can hear the rich, beautiful sound of their genuine laughter echoing through the high ceilings of the penthouse. Nobody is arguing about borrowed money. Nobody is making snide remarks about my relationship status or telling me I work too hard. Nobody is demanding that I fund their lifestyle. They are simply here to celebrate life, to share a magnificent meal prepared by a private chef I hired, and to value me for exactly who I am as a person. In our society, and especially within the Black community, we are heavily conditioned from birth to believe that family is absolutely everything. We are taught from a very young age that blood is thicker than water, and that you must always honor your parents no matter how deeply they disrespect you or damage your spirit. The church continuously preaches about forgiveness and unconditional love. The community tells you to endure the pain silently because family business is supposed to stay inside the house. You are expected to carry the heavy burdens of your toxic relatives, to be the strong and silent provider, to sacrifice your own peace of mind, just to keep the dysfunctional family machine running smoothly. But nobody ever warns you that sometimes the people who share your DNA are the most dangerous and calculating threats to your own survival. Nobody tells you that toxic parents will gladly use your deeply ingrained desire for their love as a weapon to extract your wealth. My family was not just slightly dysfunctional. They were a malignant tumor. They were a parasitic entity that fed entirely on my ambition, my relentless work ethic, and my bank accounts. They demanded my absolute loyalty while secretly orchestrating my financial ruin behind closed doors. They smiled in my face, ate the food I bought, drove the cars I insured, and then sat in a lawyer's office plotting to hand my property over to a lazy golden child and a cheating grifter. When you discover a tumor growing inside your body, you do not try to negotiate with it. You do not try to reason with it or pray that it magically turns into healthy tissue. You cut it out immediately. You endure the sharp, agonizing pain of the surgery because you know it is the only possible way to save your own life. Handing my father that red eviction folder in front of his precious church friends was my surgery. It was emotionally exhausting in the moment, but it was absolutely necessary for my long-term survival. People often ask me if I ever feel guilty about what I did. I have had distant acquaintances and even a few old clients reach out to ask if I lose sleep, knowing that my aging parents are living in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. They wonder if I feel bad that my sister is now a single mother, working a minimum wage retail job while living in a dingy motel because her fake millionaire husband abandoned her. The honest and unfiltered truth is that I do not feel a single drop of guilt. Guilt is an emotion strictly reserved for when you have actually done something wrong. I did absolutely nothing wrong. I gave them a beautiful house. I gave them a luxurious lifestyle they did not earn and could never afford on their own. I gave them countless opportunities to be decent human beings and to treat me with basic respect. They made their cruel choices, and now they are simply paying the required bill. I refuse to feel bad for no longer setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. When I walked away from them, I implemented an absolute and uncompromising rule of no contact. It is not just a boundary, it is a fortress made of solid steel. I completely changed my personal phone number the very next morning after the baby shower. I moved out of my old condo and purchased this highly secure penthouse building where the concierge has strict written orders to call the police immediately if anyone sharing my last name or my sister's married name ever attempts to enter the lobby. I went online and blocked every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and church member on all social media platforms. I do not read their emails. I have a filter set up that automatically deletes anything from their addresses. Any physical mail they try to send me is immediately marked return to sender without ever being opened. At first, the profound silence was incredibly strange to navigate. When you spend your entire life navigating chaos and managing constant emergencies, peace can initially feel like a terrifying vacuum. I was so used to my phone vibrating with demands, complaints, and financial crises that the sudden quiet made me feel anxious. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for my phone expecting a frantic text message from my mother about a declined credit card or a past due utility bill. But as the weeks slowly turned into months, that unfamiliar silence transformed into the most beautiful and soothing music I had ever heard. My nervous system finally began to regulate itself. I no longer jump when the doorbell rings. I sleep deeply and peacefully through the entire night. The energy I used to waste trying to fix their unfixable lives has been entirely redirected into my own empire. Because I am no longer carrying the dead weight of their bad decisions, my commercial real estate business has experienced an unprecedented explosion of growth. In the last 6 months alone, my brokerage has closed 3 massive multi-million-dollar acquisitions that have firmly established me as one of the top luxury brokers in the entire state of Georgia. I am currently negotiating the purchase of a boutique hotel in downtown Atlanta. My bank accounts are thriving, my investment portfolios are expanding, and I am building a legacy of generational wealth that will belong entirely to me and whatever family I eventually choose to create. The sheer amount of success you can achieve when you stop allowing toxic people to drain your energy is truly limitless. I used to think that the ultimate revenge would be watching them suffer. When I stood in that ruined living room and dropped the certified quitclaim deed on the glass table, I genuinely wanted to see the absolute terror in their eyes. I wanted them to feel the exact same deep humiliation and rejection they had subjected me to for decades. I wanted to watch their fake perfect world burn to ashes. But as I stand on this balcony tonight, looking out over the magnificent Atlanta skyline, I realize that my perspective has completely shifted and evolved. The sweetest revenge is not watching your enemies fall. The sweetest and most satisfying revenge is waking up one beautiful morning, pouring yourself a cup of coffee, and realizing you have completely forgotten they even exist. I do not care what my father is doing today. I do not care if Spencer is still running from his angry creditors or hiding from his pregnant ex-wife. I do not care if my mother is crying to her new neighbors about how her wicked daughter abandoned her. They have become absolute strangers to me. The opposite of love is not hate or anger or bitterness. The opposite of love is total and complete indifference. They no longer occupy a single square inch of real estate in my mind or my heart. I legally evicted them from my physical property, and then I permanently evicted them from my spirit. I take a deep cleansing breath of the cool night air and take a final sip of my vintage wine. The city below me is vibrant and alive, full of endless possibilities and completely unwritten chapters. I survived the ultimate betrayal. I survived years of calculated financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I walked straight through the intense fire of their toxicity, and I came out the other side entirely bulletproof and shining like a diamond. My empire is completely secure, my heart is incredibly light, and my future belongs entirely and exclusively to me. I turn around and walk back into the inviting warmth of my penthouse, sliding the heavy glass door shut behind me, blocking out the wind. I am ready to join my chosen family at the dinner table. I am ready to carve the turkey, to pour more wine, and to laugh until my stomach hurts. I am ready to live the beautiful, brilliant, and fiercely independent life that I fought so incredibly hard to protect. If you are listening to this story and you are currently drowning under the heavy, crushing weight of a toxic family, I want you to hear these words very clearly. You have absolute permission to walk away. You do not owe your abusers your success, your money, or your sanity simply because you happen to share a bloodline. You are not required to tolerate disrespect just because the person disrespecting you gave birth to you. Your peace of mind is your single most valuable asset in this world, and it is absolutely worth defending, even if it means you have to stand entirely alone for a while. Breaking generational curses requires you to be the villain in their story, so you can be the hero in your own. Have you ever had to use the legal system to evict your toxic family members out of your life? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand and permanently walk away from the very people who were supposed to love and protect you? I would love to hear your incredible stories of survival, establishing boundaries, and reclaiming your personal power in the comments section below. Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others realize they are not alone in this fight. If my journey resonated with you today, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about overcoming family betrayal, surviving narcissistic abuse, and building your own untouchable empire from the ground up. Thank you so much for watching, and please remember that the absolute best chapter of your life begins the exact moment you finally decide to choose yourself. The biggest lesson from this experience is that sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to disrespect you or drain your resources. We are often conditioned to endure toxic behavior in the name of family loyalty, but true family protects your peace instead of destroying it. Walking away from people who only value you for what you can provide is not selfish. It is necessary for your survival. You must protect your energy and your worth at all costs. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic relative to protect your sanity? Tell me your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering videos.